Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. It seems that soon after the first term paper was assigned, students have looked for shortcuts to getting them completed. Whether it was using Cliff Notes to get the gist of a novel without actually reading it, borrowing a friend's paper from a couple years ago in the same course, or just paying someone outright to write it for them, students have devised a variety of ways to produce their work with minimal effort. Along the way, teachers have become aware of these methods and have created countermeasures for them, such as creating prompts that require more in-depth knowledge than Cliff Notes will provide, or using software like Turnitin to analyze papers for any level of plagiarism. But it seems students are always one step ahead. Enter ChatGPT, a natural language processing tool driven by artificial intelligence, or AI, that allows for more human-like conversations and more with a chatbot. It is the more that has people concerned. ChatGPT can answer questions and assist with tasks such as composing emails, essays, and writing code. What's more, it's currently open to the public and free to use. To further discuss the implications of ChatGPT, including how, like Cliff Notes of old, it can be used as a tool to support learning rather than replacing it, today we welcome Dr. Christopher Grobe, Associate Professor and Chair of the English Department at Amherst College, where he has done extensive research studying the cross-section of writers, dramatists, and actors in crafting voice user interfaces like Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, and the history of AI as a theatrical problem. Dr. Grobe, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
I'm delighted to be here and to have this conversation with you. Thanks.
Well, again, thank you for agreeing to have this conversation, because I think, again, it's a very timely one. It seems like everyone around the world in different industries is talking about ChatGPT and what it can do for them. And of course, when we talk about it in an educational setting, educators are a little concerned or worried that students are going to use it to kind of cheat as opposed to producing their own work. But before we get into that conversation, can you tell us a little bit more about that research that you're doing currently using AI in the theatrical space?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I'm writing about intersections between the arts and AI, and specifically how ideas and people and techniques from the arts, especially the performing arts, have been imported into that space and used in that space. So one of the projects you alluded to, I have an article forthcoming on, among other things, the contemporary artists, people with backgrounds in theater and screenwriting and novel writing, et cetera, who are hired by tech companies to get involved in conversation design. That's the name of the field, which is creating conversational systems with which we interact. And the most common ones would be something like Siri or Alexa or Google Assistant. And one of the most interesting things to me about researching that work is seeing how arts knowledge is valued or not valued in those spaces, seeing how it's sometimes brought in just to generate quote unquote content for the system, or to kind of pretty it up once the system has pretty much already been built. But I've been studying some examples of where the collaboration between artists and technologists is a little deeper than that, and where artists are actually involved in helping design the back end of a conversational system so that it is actually capable of achieving effects that they find interesting and compelling as artists and as experts in human expression. The fact of the matter is, though, that most of those systems are, to this point in history anyway, not that reliant on natural language generation. That is, they put a lot of AI tech in understanding and parsing and categorizing what we say to the machine, but an overwhelming number of the words that it says back to us have actually been written verbatim by these humans.
Got it.
And as more natural language generation gets incorporated into those, the companies have been really cautious about leaning too hard on that. And that should tell us something about what they think of the reliability, the trustworthiness of the systems at this point. Now, as a researcher outside those spaces, I of course don't have access to the cutting edge of what each of them is doing. They're holding information back from me.
Of course.
But my sense is that when companies today talk about natural language processing, they usually mean natural language understanding and not generation. So with ChatGPT, the reason it caught my eye is because, what I do know about natural language generation systems told me right away that what this was doing was sort of networks of word associations, right? It's a large language model. So it's trained from massive amounts of data. You could say the whole, written web. And what it is doing is finding patterns and correlations amongst words that appear close to each other. And so it's like it's a really souped up version of the autocomplete that suggests what the next word should be when you're texting your friend or something, right? And so that allows it to be really impressive at certain things and not so impressive at others. And one of the most valuable things that I found to do with ChatGPT for students is just play around with it, see what it is good at, see what it's not, and really begin to understand the difference between machine intelligence as it's embodied in something like ChatGPT and human intelligence, which is other than ChatGPT and is more than ChatGPT in some ways.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, and I don't know if you can go into this aspect of it, but when I hear as far as the natural language that is trying to, whether it's trying to develop or extrapolate or whatever, I'm thinking, is it that developers are creating some type of algorithm that will kind of almost anticipate what how the conversation is going to flow based on a particular set of inputs, or is it that they're really trying to really very closely mimic what an actual conversation would look like with all the other nuances, not just the words and the combinations of words that are put into it, but all the other nuances that go into language and conversation?
The work in that area is always at the intersection of like what's technologically possible and what feels compelling and useful. And that does not mean replicating all of the features of all kinds of conversations in that system. It means finding the areas where the system feels competent and impressive. So actually, I write in this forthcoming article about some really clever apps designed for something like the Amazon Alexa platform that take advantage of the areas in which a machine can be very effective at holding a certain kind of conversation without, in fact, understanding a single thing you say. So there's a really great app that was written by somebody who has a background in MFA in creative writing called Kids Court. And it's for the Amazon Alexa platform. It won an award and from Amazon in their kids category. And it is essentially a tool for getting kids to talk through and sort out harm that was done among them, or somebody did something bad to somebody else, right?
Right.
And what it does is just like walks them through the process of, in a kind of half jokey kind of court way, of producing evidence and bringing forward witnesses and talking about whether they have proof of what happened wrong and who is to blame and all of that, right? And so it just walks you through a procedure, and at every step along the way, it's a very compelling app to engage with. But if you think about it closely, you realize that it doesn't actually have to understand much or anything of what you say to continue walking you through that procedure. And that to me is like a great example of how somebody who's thinking seriously about the way in which different kinds of conversations works, found one which was content neutral or content agnostic, but that could nonetheless give you an interesting communicative experience, and built an app around that.
And I think that's where the basic, I don't want to say basic limitation, but for lack of a better term, I guess that's where the limitations of the AI platform currently, and that's where it lies, that you can have a full conversation, but there's no understanding behind giving back the words or in the responses, as opposed to when you have a face-to-face, human-to-human conversation, that you're relying on those understandings of the words and the phrases and the nonverbals that go along with it, the conversation as well. What in a chatbot, you don't get the nonverbals to kind of define or further explain what the words are that are being used. So that understanding is lacking. Can it really, how rich can the conversation really be?
I would turn that around somewhat and say that in all conversations are joint projects between the people having the conversation. And we are both all of the time projecting into each other's words what we imagine their meaning might be, and using conversation to get at some shared sense of the meaning of what we're talking about, right?
Right.
And what is really compelling about engaging with chatbots when they're good, natural language generation tools, if they're good, some of it is what the machine is doing, and some of it is what we are projecting into the machine's output. And we are really good at projecting that in, and it can be really hard to step back and reflect, like, what did I just put in there versus what was actually in there itself. At this point, it's probably worth acknowledging too that ChatGPT, as a sort of pure large language model that is not based on like databases of fact or anything like that, it's just based on word associations, it is not operating from facts. And some of the funniest things that people have gotten it to do and say come from the fact that it's not operating on fact, it's operating on word associations. So there was this conversation you could have with ChatGPT that went viral on social media, where no matter how hard you tried, no matter how intensely you grilled it, you could not get it out of the idea that the world's fastest marine mammal was a peregrine falcon. And what I love about that is, okay, so you dive into the conversation and you figure out, why does this large language model think that the peregrine falcon is a marine mammal? Or that the proper answer to the question, what is the fastest marine mammal, is a peregrine falcon. Right. When you can grill it on the component ideas there, what is a mammal? Is a falcon a mammal? Is a falcon a marine animal? Right? You can get all the right answers to all of those, and yet somehow it gives this output when you ask, what's the fastest marine mammal? And as far as I can figure out, it's that peregrine falcons are often around water. Yeah. And their speed is associated with what they do when they're in a free dive. And diving is something we associate specifically with marine mammals, with whales diving or seals diving. And so somehow that like combination of words has made it give this absurdly incorrect statement of fact. And I think it's so much more interesting to get curious about why this very complex, but in some ways very blunt tool made an obviously incorrect statement of fact. Like, it's very cool to get into the guts and try to imagine how that mind worked. Yeah, how that mind works.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into that in a quick second. But first, I want to just do this. You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is Dr. Christopher Grobe, Associate Professor and Chair of the English Department at Amherst College. I know that we had like a few years ago, because you mentioned that that ChatGPT is not necessarily grounded in facts in its base form, because we talked like a few years ago. We had where IBM had introduced the supercomputer Watson. And I think that kind of did very similar, just pulled from a lot of different databases at a super high speed to get the answers that it was looking for. And it even went on TV and took down a couple of Jeopardy champions and all that kind of thing. Then over time, we started to see the influx of those voice user interfaces we just talked about with Siri and Alexa and so forth. Where does ChatGPT fall in that? Is it just the part of the natural evolution of things when we start talking about that voice user interface systems, or is it really branching off into a whole other realm of AI?
So ChatGPT is a really pure expression of one trend in AI right now, which is the idea that if you throw massive enough amounts of data into a system that's looking for patterns and associations, it will come to understand something about that massive set of data. That's distinct from other previous approaches. For instance, over the 70 years of people trying to design AI seriously, sometimes what they've tried to do is code certain logical principles into machines, almost like trying to reduce the logic of human thought to a kind of algebra, right? Sometimes they've tried to encode the way that experts think about an issue into a system of rules, logical or just associative rules that we might use to figure out something as an expert. And I think also, there have been attempts to give AI systems common sense about embodiment and physical relations in the world, right? And I would say the future AI systems are going to combine all of these and more together. But what ChatGPT does is just really focus on this one thing, on word associations within a large language model. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So let's get into its use. There's a practical use, and then there's the way it's actually being used. So like I said, the intended use and the way it's actually being used. So because we see that recently ChatGPT has come under fire because of the way that students have been using it to kind of basically do homework for them and I guess, quote unquote, cheat for lack of a better term. So what is it that, in your estimation, what can teachers do and professors do to ensure that the work that's turned in is truly authentic? I'm sorry to stump you there.
No. I mean, so I'm kind of wondering if I consent to the premise of the question. So my personal feeling is that it's our desire to assess students, and specifically to assess them as like unencumbered, unaided individuals, that forces us to posit this idea that they've got to be totally pure of technological entanglement for us to fairly assess them. And the article that I wrote about ChatGPT for the Chronicle of Higher Ed was really about the experience of encouraging students to interact with ChatGPT and see what it can do and really understand it as the beginning of a process of writing, right? Because, by definition, what ChatGPT produces is the most statistically likely response to a prompt, right? I would hope that we all have higher aspirations for our students than to become statistically likely. Like that's not my aim in educating students. And so I don't want to overemphasize this kind of like punitive logic of, ferreting out machine influence and ensuring that students are totally free of it. I think there are some kinds of assignments that look a lot less productive in an era of the wide availability of natural language generation systems. So anything, the function of which is basically to do something unoriginal, but to do it in your own words.
So
right? That's not going to work
right.
anymore.
So I guess what the way that I envision it, and I think you would agree with me here as well, is because you actually just said it, is that we need to think of this whole the use of AI and any other technology as a beginning and not as an end. Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. We have to use it as a beginning and not as an end. So if we teach students how to critically utilize these tools and use and see them as just that, as tools to aid you in your development, as opposed to creating your final product, then I think that's what the real goal of education is. It's to teach students to become critical thinkers and to really analyze and critique the different sources that they're using to come to this quote unquote truth that they're looking for.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that we need to say right off the bat when talking about ChatGPT is one thing it's really good at is creating relatively fluid and grammatical sentences. And I understand like that we all as teachers spend a lot of time trying to get our students there. And so it can be disheartening to see a machine that can do that so glibly and easily. But the mistake is in thinking that because it can do those things, it can do other things. We're used to when we encounter humans who can do that, we're used to being able to assume that comes with other abilities, right. Other analytical abilities, other expressive abilities, accountability to fact, right? All of these things. And so we need to know that, it can have that one ability without the others. And if we're creating assignments that genuinely require like close engagement with evidence. So I'm a literary professor, I'm in an English department. So like dealing closely with a passage from a text, right? That's not something that ChatGPT can easily do right now. If we are, asking a system, if we're asking students to really build an argument that is sustained over several paragraphs, that's not something that GPT can do right now, that ChatGPT can do right now. And trying to get it to do something like that is actually a lot of work. And it's like interesting and intellectually rewarding work, which is why I advocate getting our students involved with it, so they can get over their own sense of awe at something that writes quote unquote better than them, but doesn't necessarily think better than them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think even with that aspect of writing better, it provides them now with a model that they can emulate, so they can match up their own writing to those writing styles of the chatbot, and really, okay, what can I do? Because now it begs the question, what can I do to match my writing to that writing? And that in and of itself is a learning process. And I think also by using this in a positive way, it kind of reduces the amount of energy that teachers have to put forth in teaching students the art of writing, for lack of a better term. So instead of using that energy on the syntax of writing, they can use the energy on being more creative and expressive in the writing. That will be a little bit more rich of a better way of using that energy when they're in the classroom. The
other thing I would say is that there's a danger with ChatGPT or any natural language generation system, which is that it creates and enforces one sense of what writing can and should sound like. And so I think the danger in simply treating it as like a tool from which students learn written style is that immediately shuts down all possibilities to this one voice that is created by the machine. And so we still need to sort of combine. So the argument in my article in the Chronicle of Higher Ed is that if we start with ChatGPT language, we start with the process of struggling to get it to create something like an argument we have in our head, and then we revise what it puts out until it really expresses what we meant to say about the subject. That is a process of thinking and revision that is every bit as impressive and interesting and complicated as writing something original from scratch. But I wouldn't want, therefore, for whatever voice ChatGPT creates to become the voice or what intelligence sounds like or something like that, right? To put an end to all stylistic innovation and the expressivity of that level of voice and expressiveness and word choice.
And I think that may be one reason why a lot of these developers are turning to people in the arts to help them with the back end of these developments, so that you can create those different pathways of what intelligence may look and sound like and so forth. As a science fiction buff and a Star Trek fan, I wonder how much further we have to go before we see a Data walking around who can now kind of create their own knowledge. This artificial intelligence will start thinking for itself and things of that nature. Then we'll have that Terminator dystopian type of society going forward.
Yeah.
But if you,
I couldn't possibly comment. But,
I know you can't comment on that.
I would say I have a colleague in the computer science department at Amherst, Lee Spector, who's a specialist in AI and somebody who has worked with a lot of artists on generative AI-based projects. I think it's be fair to say he's a true believer in the idea that if you combine enough of these different approaches to machine intelligence, the common sense with the basis in fact, with the large language models, et cetera, and if you put that intelligence in a body that can create embodied spatial social meaning through interacting with the world, that something like data is actually possible. I'm a little more skeptical than him, but these are the conversations that we enjoy having.
Exactly. Well, we would definitely like to thank our guest today, Dr. Christopher Grobe, Associate Professor and Chair of the English Department at Amherst College, where he has done extensive research studying the cross-section of writers, dramatists, and actors in crafting voice user interfaces and the history of AI as a theatrical problem, for coming on to our show today.
Thanks so much.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.